Someone wrote a letter to Alan Belay. It was about his daughter, Kate, and from the first few sentences, it seemed heartfelt. The writer called Kate an angel and a happy person. At first glance, the letter seemed genuinely sympathetic, considering Alan had just lost his daughter Kate after a horrific crime unfolded. But when you look at the address that this letter came from, everything about it feels wrong. That's because this letter wasn't sent by a friend or a loved one. It was sent from prison. And Alan would soon figure out that the person who wrote this letter was the very person who stole his daughter's life. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knutz, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So, if that's your sort of thing and you like what you see, consider subscribing. It's totally free and just lets you know when I post new videos. Kate Beagley was born in Hounslow, West London, and she was defined as a person with special charm. Kate was very independent, outgoing, and caring. Her family described her as shaving a heart of gold and a good head on her shoulders. At the time of the case, Kate was working as a national compliance manager at Centria, but she'd majored in tourism and she had dreams of exploring the world before she eventually settled down. Even though Kate couldn't exactly run after her dream career at the moment, she fit in with the corporate world just fine. She was smart and experienced, and everyone loved her. She hoped this position would just be temporary, so she was just biding her time until she could explore the world and help others explore it too. Now, like a lot of people, Kate also dreamed of finding her special person, but she was single at the time that this case unfolded. She was desperately hoping to find that one person, her forever person, but she just hadn't quite found him yet. Now, with crazy hours of work, Kate needed to wedge some time into her busy schedule for fun. And she loved going to nearby clubs and restaurants to hang out with her friends and just be free for a little while. Even though she loved going here, she never really expected that her special someone might actually have been right under her nose this whole time. But, as fate would have it, that would be the case. Because one night in May of 2007, Kate headed to West End, as she so often did. But this time would be different, because she would meet a guy. She wasn't expecting anything crazy or anything serious, but she likely couldn't help but secretly wonder if this guy could be the one. This man's name was Carl Taylor. But little did Kate know, Carl was about to change her life. 7-year-old Carl Taylor was born in Notting Hill, West London, and he was actually a part-time fitness trainer. He also gave unpaid football lessons to school kids, and he was kind of your typical ladies' man, so to speak. This guy had women crawling all over him, almost literally. It wasn't necessarily because he had incredibly good looks or anything like that. He was just super nice. He seemed genuine, and he attracted a lot of people. He was just a super charismatic guy. But you know what they say, all that glitters is not gold. And let's just say that Carl had some things hidden up his sleeve. His friends and acquaintances defined him as a bit moody. His mood would change with the flip of a switch. One second he'd be laughing and having a blast, and the next he'd be breaking down in tears. And then the next thing you know, he'd fly off the handle in a fit of rage. Carl also had a criminal record. Well, sort of. He was given a community order for obtaining property by deception at his workplace. Now, we don't know whether it was the guilt of doing something wrong or the fear and humiliation of getting caught. But this event drove Carl to try to end it all. And he ended up at a bridge threatening to jump over. It was pretty scary, but he was talked out of being reckless and unreasonable, and nothing really came of it. He was talked off the ledge, and he moved on with his life. So, this was Carl, and it was May of 2007 when he went to the CC Club at 13 Coventry Street, and he crossed paths with none other than Kate Beagley. After a round of drinks and dancing, Kate and her friends made their way over to the CC Club after about 11 p.m. It was the weekend, and the girls had plans to make the most of the night. So, into the club, the group went, and it was just a short while later when Kate met Carl. Kate was instantly smitten with how attractive and smooth-talking Carl was. He was fashionable but not flashy. He was fun but a tad bit mysterious, and he was handsome and built, but also had a romantic heart. Or at least that's what she thought. Carl was taken by Kate's warm and bright personality and her beauty. Kate was extroverted, and she had no problem starting conversation, and she was literally the life of every party she went to, according to those who knew her. So, it wasn't a surprise that Carl set his sights on Kate. The two talked for what seemed like forever, and that night, they exchanged phone numbers. Kate had a really good feeling about Carl, and she was feeling giddy because it was like the two were always on the same page. They were both looking for serious relationships. Neither of them gave off any weird vibes. It was as if the stars had aligned and sparks flew. The two parted ways at the end of their night out, and that was when they started texting each other almost immediately. Well, less than 2 weeks later, Carl and Kate would go on a date together. But the problem is, immediately after that date, Kate disappeared. Kate and Carl texted each other over the course of about 2 weeks. They were flirting, getting to know each other, typical pre-date texts. Before long, the pair made plans to hang out, and May 30th would be the day when they finally went on a date. Kate was very excited. What she saw that day at the club put Carl on a pedestal. And she knew that this guy would be different. He was just so kind and generous, always showering her with compliments. And when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. Carl literally rained compliments on Kate, but he was also a gentleman and nice to Kate's friends. So it was only natural for Kate to have very high expectations for the date. So before she knew it, May 30th had rolled around and Kate went to work in the morning. And once she got free, she made her way home, got changed, and let her friends and family know that she'd be heading out to meet up with Carl. Kate had agreed to pick Carl up halfway there in her silver Volkswagen Golf, and the two went to Richmond together. The couple reached the place at around 9 p.m., and all the while, Kate was keeping her friends updated on where she was, what she was doing, and how the date was going. The couple sat down on a bench that overlooked the iconic River TS. And it was at that moment when all the butterflies Kate was feeling in her stomach died down, because, well, things were awkward. You know those times on a date when both of you just have nothing to say? And there's this huge stretch of silence and you want to talk about anything. The weather, politics, distant family, relatives, just anything to cut through. The silence. Well, that's exactly how this highly anticipated date was going. This was a very stark contrast from how the two had been chatting it up at the bar just a few nights ago. At this point, Kate was basically over it. She was disappointed, to put it plainly. She didn't see Carl from the CC Club in front of her. It was almost as if he were a totally different person. Well, the show carried on, and the two made their way to a nearby pub called Roebuck Pub. Kate ordered an orange juice for herself because she wasn't about to get drunk on a weekday night. And even though she tried her best to enjoy the date, it just wasn't going well. Carl was talking, but Kate was zoning out. She was texting her friends in between stories, telling them how badly the date was going. Kate wanted nothing but to just wave goodbye, walk out of that pub, and never look back. But you might be thinking, what bored Kate out of Herman so badly? Well, she got to know that Carl wasn't the selfless gentleman that she thought she knew. Instead, sitting across from her was a rude, arrogant narcissist who had a favorite topic of discussion himself. It was all Carl this and Carl that. And needless to say, Kate was fighting the urge to roll her eyes or plug her ears or just get up and walk away. Finally, at around 10:30, which honestly felt like an eternity, Kate got up and told Carl that she needed to go home. And she wasn't lying. She had work the next day, so she needed to make the 40-minute drive back to her home to get some shutty and just try to erase this evening from her memory. So, the two left the pub, and that was the end of the date. But the next day, Kate failed to show up for work. Her co-workers saw her empty desk, and they were honestly taken aback. Kate wasn't the type of person to just skip work without telling anyone. If that wasn't weird enough, Kate had also missed an important appointment, which was very unlike her. On top of that, Kate wasn't answering her phone. Her family soon made their way to her apartment, but her car wasn't there, and the apartment was empty. Everyone was confused. Kate had just been texting them the night before, and even though the date didn't go according to plan, she didn't give any indication that she'd be heading off anywhere else or that she'd planned on missing work. But with no sign of her at work, at home, or anywhere else, her family was forced to admit Kate was truly missing. Kate's family wanted to report her missing as soon as possible, but the investigators instructed them to wait 24 hours before they filed a report. The detectives weren't too worried. She was an adult. She could be anywhere. Maybe she wanted to take a break or just disappear off the radar for a bit. But their family didn't think so. It was just so sudden and unexpected of Kate to disappear without telling anyone anything. Finally, after 24 hours, 32-year-old Kate Beagley was reported missing. When the investigators initially looked at the case, it seemed like an abduction. But this was also strange. Kate had no enemies. She didn't have a shady history of dropping off the face of the earth without letting anyone know. This was just weird. So the police didn't have a lot to go off of. The investigators looked at different people, close friends, acquaintances, and even family members. But nothing stood out that would raise red flags. The detectives also found out that Kate's car was missing, and she was also not picking up her phone. So the investigators needed to find this car because it might have the evidence that could lead to solving this case. It had been a day since Kate had gone missing, and the police decided to talk to Kate's friends. They wanted to know what Kate was doing before she went missing. Unknown details stood out to the police, and they had no choice but to poke and prod a bit further. See, Kate's friends let the investigators know that she'd gone out on a date with a man named Carl on the evening of May 30th. And this was really unusual for the police. Kate went out with a stranger and now she was missing. Even though the detectives didn't know what to think of this man yet, they knew one thing for sure. Carl was probably the last person to see Kate alive. So, a day or so after Kate's disappearance, the man in question, Carl Taylor, was questioned by the police. The investigators first decided to call Carl, and when he picked up, nothing seemed unusual. He seemed worried for Kate, and he tried his best to provide all the details that he could. He told the detectives that the two went to sit by the River Thames for a bit, and when it started to rain, they went to a pub and had a drink. And then at about 10:30, Kate dropped Carl off at a bus stop, and he saw her leaving in her car. Carl stressed that he didn't know what happened to her or how she could have gone missing. She was fine when they parted ways. But there was something the police got to know which didn't match up with Carl's story. See, the investigators had talked to Carl's mom, and she remembered Carl coming back home in a silver Volkswagen Golf. She'd never seen the car before, and she asked whose it was. Carl came up with some excuse that initially appeased his mom, but he even went on later to give her some gift cards that she found out he had found inside of that car. Interestingly enough, Carl's mom also saw Carl cleaning the car, especially the trunk in the rear end. This was really odd, and the investigators knew that Carl was shitting something, but they decided to wait for more details to emerge. So, the investigators had to let him go for the time being. Now that the detectives knew where Kate and Carl went, they then decided to look at CCTV cameras on the route that Carl and Kate had taken, and things were bizarre to say the least. The investigators checked activity on Kate's bank card, and it was as if they were finding just one thing after another. First, they found that Kate's card was used to buy gas at a gas station in the early hours of May 31st. So, when the police went and checked the CCTV footage from that gas station, they saw a familiar face. But it wasn't Kate, but Carl at the gas station. He hopped out of Kate's car, the same Volkswagen that Carl's mom remembered seeing, and proceeded to fill it up with gas. He also paid with a credit card, which the investigators now knew belonged to Kate. But the detectives couldn't see anyone else in the car. There was no one in the passenger seat or in the back seat of the car. Granted, it was dark, and you could barely see anything in the footage, but this detail was easy enough to make out. The detectives knew that things weren't looking good. Kate's date was using her car, and she was nowhere to be found. It also nodded the police that this man was still a stranger to Kate. So why would she hand over her car to a stranger after one date? Kate used her car to go to work. She used it to run errands. It wasn't like she didn't need her car. So why was it now with Carl? Well, the investigators needed to figure this out. So they continued to question Carl, and Devin went to meet him at a party, which was kind of bizarre. But suddenly, the investigators noticed that trademark shift in Carl's behavior. He went from being cooperative to tight-lipped. And suddenly, the answer to all of the police's questions was no comment. The detectives ultimately arrested Carl on suspicion of kidnapping and then murdering Kate Beagley, and he was kept in a cell. Now, even though Kate hadn't been found, it didn't take a genius to realize that things were taking a dark turn. Even though no one wanted to think about the worst, they couldn't help their wandering minds. But with little else to go on, the police kept Carl locked in a cell while they worked to put a round of questions out for him. But the story that Carl was about to share with the detectives, it was unlike anything they could have expected. Carl was in police custody, and he had no way out. And it was at this point that Carl really began to sweat. He was incredibly nervous. But for what reason? Well, the police would soon find out, because without much prying or provocation, Carl confessed to murdering Kate just like that. Just completely out of the blue, he opened up and admitted to everything. But let's be honest, we all probably saw that coming. Maybe not quite so easily, but the story fits together like pieces of a puzzle. It's obvious, but the bigger question here is why? What had happened that led to such a grave outcome? Well, an emotionless Carl told the detectives that he had plans to steal something of Kate's on their date, but it wasn't her heart. It was Kate's car. He also went on to say that he tucked a sharp weapon in the sleeve of his fur-lined coat, and he wanted to subdue her with it. This man really brought a weapon to a first date, and he had a malicious plan of robbing a poor woman of her car. A woman who was just out looking for the love of her life, true love, with someone she could trust and rely on. Let that sink in. This young woman went out hoping to find her forever person, but instead, she found Carl. Now, if you remember, later on in the evening, Kate politely told Carl she had to go back home and signal the end of their date. Well, that was when Carl put his plans into motion. As the couple reached Kate's car, Carl put on his best acting face, and he began to dig into his pockets under the pretense of finding his house keys. He made it seem to Kate that he'd lost them somewhere along the way. And Kate, being the helpful person she was, decided to look for Carl's keys with him, and the search led them to that bench near Theraver Tumps. And that was when Carl tried to subdue Kate and demanded she hand over her car keys. Now, from this point on, this is mainly Carl's version of events because only two people know what went down in that garden near the River Thames. It's Carl and Kate. And as we all know by now, Kate is not here to tell her side of the story. Well, Carl claims that during the struggle, Kate, quote, accidentally jabbed herself with the weapon and that she'd been the one to take her own life, and he was just waving the weapon in her face to scare her, supposedly. Carl said he was in a state of shock as he saw struggling Kate now lying on the ground. But what did Did he call the police, the emergency services? Absolutely not. Carl said that he lay down on the grass, looked up at the sky, and cried his eyes out. At one point, he changed his story and said that he attacked Kate in self-defense because she was the one jumping onto him and going for his face. Well, whatever happened, the investigators wanted to know where Kate was now. And that was when Carl volunteered to lead them exactly to where he disposed of Kate's body. This whole situation was just happening so fast. One moment detectives are looking for Kate, the next they're looking for a killer, and now their killer confessed and offered to take them right to the crime scene. This was honestly making the police officers' heads spin. But who's to argue with someone who's willing to come clean so quickly and so completely in such a short amount of time? Well, it was June 4th, 2007. Just 5 days into Kate's disappearance when Carl the police to Oxy Woods in a remote wooded area and right by some thorny bushes and branches. The investigators discovered a disrobed and badly disfigured Kate. She was discarded in air remote, place left dehumanized and cold. The weirdest part about the discovery of her body was that she'd been completely disrobed, but there were no signs of an assault of that nature. This detail has never really been explained, but my best guess is that Carl maybe stole her clothes in case his DNA was found on them. But the detectives were left in utter shock when they looked at the wounds. The autopsy results showed that Kate was attacked a total of 31 times. This was clearly not self-defense. This was overkill. All for a car. Carl then confessed that he used mineral water from Kate's car to get rid of his DNA on her body and then loaded her body up in the trunk of her own vehicle. Ethan went to get some gas, and on the way, he discarded Kate's clothes and the murder weapon as well as Kate's phone, all of which were later found by the investigators after her body was found. In hindsight, the CCTV footage is so eerie because even though we can't see it, we know that Kate is in the trunk of her own car while the murderer is out filling the car up with gas and paying for it with her credit card. It's just sickening. What is so heartless is that Carl was seen drinking at a bar in the West End after this horrific act, and he was having the time of his life in Kate's car, driving it like he was auditioning for the next Fast and Furious sequel. This man ended a young woman's life without a second thought, then just went back to life as usual. This is a new level of cold. But just because police had all this evidence, that didn't mean that the crime would stick. Carl still needed to go to trial, and as we all know, a conviction is often a lot easier said than done. Carl was charged with the murder of Kate Beagley. And even though he confessed to the police about everything, he still pleaded not guilty. In court, he ran with his story that Kate had harmed herself. And he also went on a tangent about being famous with the ladies. If that doesn't tell you how narcissistic and heartless he is, I don't know what will. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and in the end, there was overwhelming evidence against this monster. Carl Taylor was found guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. He was emotionless and stone-faced when the verdict was read, just like when he callously ended the life of a young woman who was doing nothing but helping him. It's so devastating, but you'd be mistaken if you thought that Carl was done with his antics, as if he didn't already make the Beagley family go through their worst by taking their daughter's life. Carl went in to write a letter to Kate's dad. To cut a long story short, the letter was essentially Carl ranting and painting himself to be a victim. He called the prosecution obscene and went on about life being hard for everyone and how some people kick good people like him to the side. His exact words were, quote, "We live in a world where life is hard for all, and those who try and embrace good nature get rejected. Without any doubt, what I did was wrong. But ask yourself this, whose life have I really taken?" To answer his question, he took the life of a kind, generous, and amazing young woman who was the light of her loved one's world. He murdered a good-natured and hard-working woman with whom life was also hard. But she wasn't going around crying about it and blaming other people. Life's hard for everyone. Carl was clearly a violent creature disguised in human skin. Hiding behind his charming facade was Avery's hideous and twisted face that Kat unfortunately managed to catch a glimpse of. A candle-lit vigil was held for Kate and her friends and family, and strangers even gathered to pay respect and remember an amazing and friendly woman. Her brother broke down in tears when he reminisced about Kate being the flower girl at his wedding. He'll never see Kate walk down the aisle or make her own dreams come true, and that's something that tears him apart. This case was absolutely insane. To think that a first date can end in tragedy and horror, it'll send chills down anyone's spine. Whether Carl really wanted to rob Kate, or whether he was offended that Kate wasn't as charmed by his narcissistic personality as he wanted her to be, whatever the reason may be, Kate didn't deserve to have her life snatched away so brutally like this. The Beagley family has lost a huge part of themselves, and that's something they can never recover from. In the end, I just hope that the Beagley family is somehow able to find the closure that they want and need. And truthfully, I hope Carl is able to find the help that he needs behind bars because he's clearly a sick and deranged man. This wasn't some sort of emotional outburst that led to tragedy. This wasn't someone being blinded by rejection and just acting without thinking. This man had a plan from the very beginning, and he preyed on such an innocent and vulnerable young woman all because he wanted her car. I really hope somewhere out there is help for this man, and I really hope that the Beagley family is in some small way eventually able to make it out of this incredibly disorienting haze of darkness. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. If you're new here and you like the video, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. It's completely free, and it just lets you know when I post new videos. If you love the channel and you want to help support us, maybe consider hitting that join button below the video and become a member of the channel. It allows you to see new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're posted to the public. And it's a great way to help out the channel financially. And I appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. And speaking of which, I wanted to give a shout out to a couple new channel members this week, including Sarah Enman and Marilyn Halter. And don't forget, you can grab True Crime Stories t-shirts by clicking the link below the video, including our most recent It's Never a Mannequin tee. But with that, my name is Ty Knutz. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.